Tonight that the Department of Justice has caved in to pressure from the White House and is now reportedly reopening the investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server. About time, you say? You're exactly right. But what is really happening, and who is winning the fight for truth, justice, and the American way? Chris Farrell of Judicial Watch joins me here tonight to assess. Also tonight, a new push for amnesty. President Trump today meeting with 6 pro-amnesty Republican senators at the White House, including one of the architects of the Gang of 8 disaster, Senator Lindsey Graham. We'll take up the reasons that this small band of rhinos seem designated to lead the nation on an issue of only middling importance to most Americans and of great contention between the president's base and the establishments of both political parties. Also tonight, a deadly winter storm hammering the East Coast with blizzard conditions, and in a few places the storm's winds gusting as high as 80 miles an hour. Meteorologists call it a bomb cyclone. It's prompted thousands of flight cancellations and mounting worries that some power outages could last through the weekend. We'll have a live report from one of the worst hit areas. We have it all here tonight. Our top story, the Department of Justice reportedly preparing a new investigation into Hillary Clinton's lengthy pattern of mishandling national security and breaking the law, it is alleged. The focus on her use of a private email server while she served as Secretary of State certainly amounts to evidence. It follows reports that congressional investigators do have evidence that the FBI believes laws were broken. There's also new evidence. Former FBI Director James Comey leaked classified documents. Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley has seen 4 classified Comey memorandum. It appears Comey sent at least one of those to a professor friend of his shortly after his firing. And House investigators and the Justice Department have reached a deal to provide records on the discredited Fusion GPS dossier. They will have access to all records and witnesses, including Peter Strzok, Bruce Orr, Lisa Page, all set to testify before the committee this month. And this news just breaking. A federal judge has ruled that the House Intelligence Committee is entitled to Fusion GPS bank records linked to the funding of the dossier and to considerable mischief, as it appears, in the so-called collusion scandal. Our first guest tonight revealing shocking new details concerning Hillary Clinton's email system, that illicit system identifying at least 18 classified emails found on Anthony Weiner's laptop. Weiner, of course, once married to Clinton aide Uma Abedin. Joining us now, Chris Farrell, Director of Investigations and Research for Judicial Watch. That's the organization which has successfully filed a Freedom of Information Act request to release these very documents. Chris, first of all, congratulations on getting these documents and all of the work that Judicial Watch is doing. Now, when we talk about classified, these are not up-classified documents. These are, in fact, classified at the time they were transacting on the email server of Mrs. Clinton at home.
That is correct, Lou, and thanks. It's very important that distinction be made. These records and documents were classified at the time that they were produced and transmitted. They are not so-called retroactively classified. That's a smokescreen and a red herring. They were classified when they were written, they were classified when they were transmitted, and they were classified when they were resident on the Weiner laptop.
And the FBI investigators presumably knew that, did they not? They just didn't share it with the public.
Absolutely. And I have a tidbit concerning Mr. Grassley and the Comey memos. I may be jumping ahead a bit, but this is important.
Jump in any direction you want here.
We have a sworn declaration from David Hardy, who is the chief FOIA officer of the FBI that we obtained just in the last few days. And in that sworn declaration, Mr. Hardy says that all of Comey's memos, all of them, were classified at the time they were written, and they remain classified. So the kind of open question from Mr. Grassley about is it 4 of 7 or what time were they?
Right.
No, we have a sworn declaration from the chief FOIA officer of the FBI. They were classified at the time that Comey wrote them.
And while that may not be determinate, I suppose at some point forward in litigation, should it come to that, it is determined in the case of FOIA and gives us a clear understanding, it would seem, the thinking of the FBI as to the level of classification for all of those memoranda.
Well, it's also mishandling of national defense information, right, which is a crime. So it's clear that Mr. Comey not only authored those documents, but then knowingly and willfully leaked them to persons unauthorized, which is in and of itself a national security crime. Mr. Comey should have been read his rights back on June 8th when he testified before the Senate. And
he has not been read his rights yet. He has not been charged yet. Who would be the charging party? Would it be the FBI itself?
Well, the Attorney General of the United States and the Department of Justice would actually bring an indictment once they impanel a grand jury. But the investigative process, of course, would be conducted by the FBI. And
the FBI that he once led has to be furious that he has sullied the name of the storied agency, that he has led the FBI in its most politicized, I think it's fair to say. One thought that the J. Edgar Hoover days, parts of those years, were highly politicized, but it's beginning to look as nothing touched the FBI during the Obama years.
The recently retired and active duty FBI agents have told me, and it's several of them, they consider Comey to be a dirty cop.
A dirty cop, and one who is certainly pious as he talks about how to
his tweets with Bible verses and haikus or whatever else he's been writing recently.
and the laudable photography that he has committed out in the Midwest. The list goes on. Let's turn to the Intel Committee. I took it that Devin Nunes, the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, actually was somewhat, that the Speaker, Paul Ryan, thumbed his nose at the chairman when he met with the head of, with Rod Rosenstein to discuss what would be produced. We're seeing that smooth out a bit here today as Nunes has been brought into the conversation. Your thoughts about how that demand for documents and testimony has proceeded and where it's going now?
Well, yesterday's event where Director Wray and Deputy AG Rosenstein went up on the Hill to meet with the Speaker, it was a staged event, right? This was all very deliberate. And unfortunately, Chairman Nunes was really treated rather poorly, in my view. He was excluded from the meeting. Yeah. Which is an extraordinary insult to the man who issued the subpoenas in the first place.
Yeah, could I interject there too, Chris? It's also an insult to the man whose committee has actually, to this point, produced more compelling evidence involving knocking down the collusion allegations, the nonsense that we've had to endure here for some time, and this administration has had to endure. He has created real results from investigation and shared it with the public to this point, a considerable amount of it. So he and his committee deserve great credit, not to be insulted by the Speaker or anyone else.
Correct, and he was unjustly smeared in this phony ethics complaint against him. Oh, yeah. And so now, the Speaker negotiates some sort of an agreement. Purportedly, the word all shows up somewhere. It's a head scratcher. I'm not entirely convinced of what was done, but I do know that excluding the chairman who issued the subpoena was a pretty gross insult to him. But I guess they're all on board now, but I'm sure there was some negotiation about that.
Yeah, and shame on the Speaker for his conduct and for his attitude. He aligned himself for 24 hours with the deep state, the permanent government, if you will, the administrative state, represented by Rosenstein and others at the top of justice. It's sickening. Let me turn to Grassley and your point about the 7 memos of Comey's. If they're all in classified, why aren't charges forthcoming? Why isn't this Justice Department moving right now against the former FBI director?
Yeah, I mean, here's another case where there's disparity of treatment under the law. You know, laws are for the little people. And
there are a large number of names. That place needs to be cleaned out. The top floor of the FBI as well as the Justice Department.
You are correct. It's ripe with subversion. And really, there needs to be, I think, I don't want to call it an ultimatum, that's too strong a word, but there needs to be a heart-to-heart, let's say, and either it's, take open, aggressive law enforcement action or get out of the way.
Chris Farrell, as always, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Lou.
And good, interesting counsel. We're coming right back with much more. Stay with us. The president committed to building the wall and putting an end to chain migration.
Remember that we're going to have a wall. Crucially, the legislation must end chain migration. It must end the visa lottery.
We discuss the president's America First immigration policy. Ed Rollins joins us. And a bomb cyclone, what a name. Pummeling the East Coast with an Arctic blast and massive blizzard. We'll have the latest for you on this historic winter storm. Stay with us. We'll be right back. President Trump today discussing immigration reform at a meeting with 6 Rhino Republican senators, well, most of them at least were rhinos, many of whom have backed legislation that would grant amnesty to tens of thousands of illegal immigrants, perhaps far more. But the president stood firm, saying there would be no deal on DACA without major concessions on critical items on his immigration agenda.
Any legislation on DACA must secure the border with a wall. It must give our immigration officers the resources they need to stop illegal immigration and also to stop visa overstays. And crucially, the legislation must end chain migration.
And joining me now, Ed Rollins, former political director, White House political director under President Reagan, Fox Business contributor, great American. Good to have you here.
The president's absolutely right. The security part of this is what we need, and letting more people in is not the secret here. The Democrats want DACA to be extended, and they've got a couple months before it's. They've got to give something up, and the security is the part that's very, very important.
It's strange because the president campaigned on the wall.
Absolutely.
He didn't campaign on DACA.
Right.
And here we are at the beginning of the year. He's talking with 6 effectively, either no name or very little name,
right.
Republicans who have, with the exception of the chair of the Judiciary Committee, they have no chairmanships. I mean, it's just a strange moment.
Well, again, as we've talked on this show, we've had 2 presidents who had both Bush and Obama who had majorities of their own party, and they wanted immigration reform, and they could never get the security part done. And Trump, if he wants to get the security part, has to basically do just what he did.
Why in the
draw the
world
line
are those folks in that office with the president?
I have no idea. I have no idea.
I mean, it is peculiar because we're talking about one of the, right. This is a 4 or 5 number
I want
priority for the people of the
I want
country.
guys in there who basically promised to fulfill the security requirements that the president campaigned on and got elected on. And the wall is not just a symbol. The wall is basically a battle for the security of our borders.
You know, I love when people talk about, the wall could be anything. It's symbolic. It's all of this. The president didn't talk about a symbolic wall. He didn't talk about it being anything. It's very clear. You were there. So when President Reagan signs amnesty in 1986, what was his greatest regret after doing so? Was
doing the amnesty bill, because the part of letting people in and letting people be citizens who are here illegally was completed. But the part that was not completed was the security or the employment ratification. And he and Alan Simpson, who was part of the Simpson-Mazzoli bill, said it was the biggest regret they ever had.
And, then you fast forward to even Bill Clinton, 1996. The next, every 10 years you want to try to get something done on this. It's the same thing. They sold out the border, the sovereignty of the country for cheap labor. And by the way, make no mistake, this is all driven by the need of corporate America, particularly for cheap labor.
Well, equally as important, every one of these young people who are here under DACA basically came in as illegals when the law was in existence. So if you
how many are there, do you think?
They say 800,000. I have no idea.
Do you know what? I mean,
we have no idea.
Now, one of those people pushing DACA will sit down and say, well, okay, well, all we need is some sort of standing for this number of people, because they're lying through their teeth and they're distorting the numbers, and they're saying, well, they only applied for 300,000 jobs. We know one thing, even as Schumer is talking about deadlines, there are about 300,000 of those who have signed up under DACA who have until November to work out their visas. So there's no deadline here, March or whenever the...
Equally as important, you don't want to confuse the budget negotiations. You don't want to let the Democrats have the gun to his head. And I think at the end of the day, he needs to say, I'm not dealing with DACA at this point in time. Let's get the budget. Let's get the things that are important right now.
Well, help me out on something. What was the last bill a Democrat voted for in the House or the Senate under President Trump?
I don't know of any.
I don't either. So what is the conversation?
So it's probably some post office that they named somewhere across the country for some Democrat.
I bet you they were pretty careful about that. It looks like with the judge demanding that Fusion GPS turn over its bank records to the House Intelligence Committee, that's a very big deal.
Absolutely.
Because it means the federal government may actually be home to the sovereign power of this nation.
Well, I hope it is, and obviously this judge is...
Where it has priority and power over even a smear merchant like Fusion GPS.
Well, that story needs to be told, and who the sponsors were, where the money was coming from, was very, very important. So, good.
And we can't wait to see that, can we?
No, we can't.
Ed Rollins, thank you, my friend.
Thank you, my friend.
Be sure to vote in our poll tonight. The question is, do you believe DACA and amnesty should be the first priority for Congress and the White House in this beautiful, wonderful new year? Cast your vote on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Follow me on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Like me on Facebook. Follow me on Instagram at Lou Dobbs tonight. And tonight, a massive winter storm called a bomb cyclone is pounding the East Coast, blasting states all the way from Florida to Maine. Snow, wind gusts topping out at nearly 80 miles an hour in some places. Fox Business's Connell McShane braving some of the worst conditions of it all. Good evening, Connell.
Good evening, Lou. You know, those worst conditions have finally passed us here in the city of Boston, but it was pretty rough even for an area that's used to this kind of thing earlier today. That bomb cyclone effect that you talk about sounds pretty bad, and in fact, that when it hits like it did today, it is pretty bad. You have a quick drop in the atmospheric pressure, and it basically creates, for all intents and purposes, sort of a winter hurricane. That's what we had. There are 13 inches of snow on the ground here in Boston, some more in the suburbs, but they're used to that in New England. When you combine it with the wind gusts, 76 miles an hour registered out at Nantucket today, and then throw in a high tide that today really saw the streets of Boston being flooded with chunky water, chunky ice water, and the shore areas down to the South Shore beaches being flooded. A lot of inland flooding was being reported. That became the story, the flooding rather than the snow and the ice. And for the next few days, that's what they're going to have to clean up. And clean up, Lou, is what they're doing. One of the other private snowplows going by just outside the hotel where we are in the Boston Harbor, and they've been at this all day long, both the private guys and the public sanitation workers, and that is their challenge, because tonight into tomorrow, into the day after, it's going to freeze here. 24 hours from now, the temperatures will probably be down in the single digits, and then by Saturday around 0, maybe even in the negative area Fahrenheit. So that's where we are, but they're used to this type of thing up here in Boston. Today was pretty rough.
All right. Well, I'm glad you braved it and survived it. Connell McShane from Boston, thanks so much. On Wall Street today, another record-breaking session for stocks. The Dow gaining 152 points. Not only do we have a new record to tell you about, ladies and gentlemen, the Dow Jones Industrials posting a 7th millennial milestone, 25,075. That's right, the first time ever. The S&P up 11, the Nasdaq up 12, all of the indexes at record highs. Volume on the big board picking up a bit to 3.6 billion shares. The Dow hitting 25,000, by the way, 23 days after it hit 24,000. That is the fastest 1,000-point gain for the Dow in all of history. And a reminder to listen to my reports 3 times a day, coast to coast, on the Salem Radio Network. Up next, pressure mounting on the largely absent Attorney General Jeff Sessions to step up and rein in the Russia probe that has proved fruitless and futile, or step down from his job. That's the subject of my commentary coming up here next. Stay with us. We'll be right back. A few thoughts now on the Trump administration's Justice Department and the Attorney General, who has inexplicably withdrawn from his role, who has refused to carry out most of his duties as the nation's leading law enforcement officer. Jeff Sessions has retreated not only from his responsibilities, but is more focused on upsetting, it seems, potheads than defending this president and this nation from deep state subversion. I've long called for his resignation. Back in August, I said if Sessions intended to recuse himself from the Russia probe before being appointed Attorney General, he should resign. And now momentum is only growing. Freedom Caucus leader Congressman Mark Meadows and Jim Jordan calling for Sessions to go now, citing Justice Department leaks and conflicts, adding, quote, "It would appear he has no control at all of the premier law enforcement agency in the world." House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes last week said, quote, "It seems the DOJ and FBI need to be investigating themselves." Despite the deal made last night and today with the Department of Justice over access to documents and witnesses pertinent to the anti-Trump dossier, Sessions hasn't been entirely at rest, however. An ally of Sessions today telling the Daily Beast that the Justice Department is taking a fresh look at Hillary Clinton's private email server. They should be embarrassed that they ever failed to take up that investigation and indeed prosecution. The Attorney General late last month directed justice officials to look into the FBI's Uranium One investigation at long last. But it's simply too little, too late from a man who isn't doing his job, who isn't fighting for this president who appointed him. He has to, at this point, he seems to have at least retired altogether as a public servant. The American public deserves a full-time, full-throated Attorney General working for them and their president. Now the quotation of the evening. This one from Lao Tzu, who said, "If you do not change direction, you may end up where you are heading." We're coming right back with much more. Stay with us. The Trump administration suspending all security aid to Pakistan, saying Pakistan has failed to take decisive action against radical Islamist terrorists.
This is something that should not come as a surprise to Pakistan. Pakistan has not done enough to detain terrorist and militant groups.
It's America first, and the Trump doctrine couldn't be clearer. We take it up with Dr. Sebastian Gorka. And this daring speedwriter lighting up the dark sky like a shooting star, taking skiing in the French Alps to new extremes. You don't want to miss it. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Red storm rising. Chinese President Xi Jinping telling his armed forces to prepare for war. Addressing a formation of thousands of his soldiers surrounded by tanks yesterday, President Xi urged his army to strengthen combat training and not to fear death. Xi recently reshuffled the government to make himself the most powerful Chinese leader since Mao Zedong. The Trump administration has suspended almost all security aid to Pakistan. State Department officials say more than $1 billion of assistance will be frozen. The suspension could be lifted if Pakistan does more to fight radical Islamist terrorist groups, but they have done very little indeed since September 11th, 2001. Joining me now, Fox News national security strategist, contributor, Dr. Sebastian Gorka. Good to have you with us. And Seb, let's start with Pakistan. This president, again, doing what none of his predecessors had the guts to do, which is to deal honestly with the empirical reality that is Pakistan is far more a problem than part of the solution.
Happy New Year, Lou. Yes, as usual, The president ignores the absurd theories and views of the so-called elite that got us into the messes we got into for the last 16 years, cuts straight to the chase and calls things as they are. And we've given billions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer aid to Pakistan, and for what? Let's just remember one salient point. Osama bin Laden, the mastermind of 9/11, was found living in his villa less than a mile and a half from the Pakistan equivalent of West Point.
Right.
That doesn't occur without the acquiescence of very high members of the Pakistani regime. This isn't about casting aspersions on all of Pakistan, but that government is corrupt, and many members of that government have been in bed with the Taliban and the jihadis.
Iran. Not since 2009 have we seen the likes of the demonstrations in Iran, perhaps more broadly, geographically this time than even then. This president, however, offering aid to the people of Iran rather than sitting on his hands as President Obama did, and a number of Obama officials, including his National Security Advisor Susan Rice, counseling the Trump administration to be quiet as the people of Iran express their desire for freedom and to throw off the suppression, the oppression of the authoritarian ayatollahs.
Yeah, I'm sure Susan Rice, Ben Rhodes, Obama, and the rest of his coterie would like us to be very quiet also about the almost $200 billion they gave the theocratic dictators in Iran, which they used to suppress their own people, and now those brave Iranians are standing up. And the president's not an interventionist. He's not going to invade foreign countries like the neocons, but he's going to stand up for their right to choose their own government, give them moral and spiritual support, and hopefully a little bit more in terms of their capacity to communicate with each other. Lou, there's a big change from 2009. We have more than 40 million smartphones in Iran since then. That helps you organize a resistance to the dictators. So we shall see.
And it's getting very little coverage. These demonstrations.
Incredible.
And national left-wing media. It's stunning.
It is stunning. This is a regime that has exported terrorism since 1979 across the globe. Now, from Yemen to the tri-border area of Latin America, it's an unclassified thing. You can Google. There are Hezbollah cells here in America. And now Iran is in trouble because they're so overextended, they have to make the decision, pull back their forces to protect the regime or keep them out there and potentially have some kind of uprising inside Iran. The fact that the mainstream media won't cover it speaks to how much they colluded with the last administration with regards to the Iran deal and everything else.
A quick thought as we conclude here. Steve Bannon appears to me to have committed political suicide. And by the way, he may have done as well broadcasting and financial suicide for Breitbart. With his extraordinary insults of the president and his family. What are your thoughts?
Look, first things first, Michael Wolff, the author of this book, is a political hack. Even Tony Blair, that well-known conservative, has said that he lied about the quotes he put in Tony Blair's mouth. But Steve has to stand up to the plate. He has to say, is what Wolff said true or not? Otherwise, he's going to go down in flames.
The fact that he hasn't already spoken to that, Seb, to me, speaks volumes, and I think it would as well for most Americans.
I think everybody's drawing the requisite conclusions, Lou.
Carefully said, Seb. Thanks so much. I would expect no less. Dr. Sebastian Gorka.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please roll the video and watch as this speed flyer lights up the night sky over the French Alps using a custom wing outfitted with LED lights. And if you're wondering, it only took 7 months for him to prepare and to execute this dazzling light show in the French Alps. Not a bad way to ski if you have, I suppose you require some skill, but all of that equipment, of course. Up next, the bomb cyclone. That's what it's called, bringing blizzard conditions and coastal flooding to, well, almost everywhere on the East Coast. And once it passes, a polar vortex will surely unleash bitter cold we'll have a full report for you on just how bad it can get and may get. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Frigid weather, blizzard weather in the Northeast. Even worse, however, though, than the so-called bomb cyclone is a bomb cyclone followed up with a polar vortex, and that is exactly what the Northeast is facing. That's happening along the East Coast tonight. And to give you a sense of just how cold it is, NASA put out this map showing how much of the nation is in below average temperatures and how much above. Areas in blue, obviously colder than average, the red, warmer than average. And that tells an amazing story. Goodness. Fox News Channel meteorologist Adam Klotz, live at the Weather Center. Good evening, Adam.
Hey, good evening there, Lou. Yeah, this has been a big system we're continuing to track. The good news is, at this point, really running up into extreme New England. So places like Maine, the only spots still really seeing some heavy activity from this particular system. So we see, sorry, I've got a frog in my throat. At this point, Boston still seeing some light snow in Providence, but New York just spotty snow showers at this point, a little farther off to the south, not nearly as bad. Now the problem as this continues to move up is we're going to be replacing it with very cold air. These are the spots where you still might see a little bit of precipitation, wintry mix there, and still a blizzard warning stretching into portions of Maine. But on the back side of this, as it continues to move, it grabs some of that very cold air that's off to the north, and it eventually is going to be pumping it down into New England, into portions of the Midwest. And you can see here in an hour-by-hour forecast, as this continues to climb to the north, it runs up into Canada, it grabs some of that very cold air, and before you know it, you're looking at temperatures falling down to 14 degrees, to 9 degrees, running just a little further off to the west, spots where you're down into the single digits. That's going to be the case the next couple of days, in some cases highs topping off only into the negatives across portions of the Midwest, stretching here into New England as well. Forecasted highs for us on Friday. Yeah, these are the high temperatures the entire day. Highs in some cases only in single digits, 14 degrees in New York City. Unfortunately, this isn't as cold as it gets. Continue to march on here, and you're going to be seeing these numbers drop even farther. 11 degrees for folks in New York City, 7 degrees in Boston on Saturday. Still places getting down into single digits. It gets even colder for us on Sunday as you're looking at spots, at least in extreme New England, still down in single digits, Lou. So this is going to be a frigid one. If you thought it was over just because the snow's wrapping up, that is not the case.
Well, I'll tell you this, after watching that forecast and those frigid temperatures, Adam, we're all choking up a little bit with these weather prospects that you've just outlined. Thanks so much for the outlook. We appreciate it. Adam Klotz. Up next, the Democratic National Committee's Keith Ellison. What a fella. Blasted after proudly posing, he did, with a copy of the Antifa handbook. What a wonderful thing to do. We'll take it up with our panel. Molly Hemingway and Niger